I recently found this very unique DVD vending machine for sale on Facebook Marketplace for a little over $5,000, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. That's the kind of money where you stop calling it a purchase and start calling it an unwise investment. Then I found a similar machine on eBay for about half that price, around $2,400, and I thought, okay, still no. That's like buying an old pinball machine, which means you pay a lot of money and then immediately start learning new skills you did not ask for. Eventually, I found one much closer to home for $350. I know what you're thinking. Oh, this is where he finally caves, but absolutely not. I talked to the sellers and got the price down to $275 because, come on, it's the economy. You have to at least try. I mean, it's polite. So we jumped into the truck and headed out to Navasota, Texas. And I brought my wife along because I had heard that there was a bit of a situation inside the building. When we arrived, no one was around, so we peeked through a hole in the front door like responsible adults, and we were pretty sure we could see the DVD vending machine just sitting in there, minding its own business. Turns out they didn't just have a strange DVD vending machine. They also run a haunted house during the Halloween season. And since the lights were on and no one was actively trying to scare us, we walked through it anyway. Even with full lighting and 0 actors, it's still a haunted house, which means your brain fills in the rest, whether you want it to or not. We exchanged money and officially took possession of the machine, which was extremely heavy, easily 600 pounds. It was filled with an unknown number of DVDs, and, based on the circumstances, I chose not to ask follow-up questions. We made the customary pit stop at Buc-ee's, partly to grab snacks and partly to show off our newly acquired DVD machine to passers-by, because if you don't tell Buc-ee's patrons about your super weird purchases, do they even happen? We got home late that evening, and aside from some scratches I noticed before loading it, important distinction, it made the trip back in one piece. That next morning, I broke out my turtle wax rubbing compound to see what I could do about the marks on the side of the machine. I've learned that if you find a scratch on something, there's always a chance it came from something else and is therefore removable. After some time with a magic eraser and the rubbing compound, I removed the majority of the gouges and declared this a complete and utter success. The machine still isn't perfect cosmetically, as you can see here, where the plastic frame around the monitor has a crack or two in it. I could probably remove that piece and reinforce it from behind with some JB Weld, but not today. Today, we have a mission, and that mission starts with opening the machine to see what exactly we're dealing with inside. Now, normally, this is the part where I grab a drill and immediately give up on subtlety. Today, however, I'm trying something new, something calmer, something more peaceful. We're going to attempt to pick the lock. And if that works, we can replace it later with a new lock that understands its role and cooperates. After a bit of research, I learned that for first-time lock pickers, one commonly recommended tool is the plastic casing of a Bic pen, which feels both accessible and deeply suspicious. I found a few candidate pens that fit into the circular lock opening and began following the advice I'd read earlier. As you might expect, this was either going to be incredibly fast and impressive or long, frustrating, and humbling. Naturally, it was long and frustrating, with humbling closing the gap quickly. My hand did get a great workout, though. So if I need to open a jar of pickles later or knock on a door with authority, I'm ready. I'm not sure how long it took me to finally give up, but once I did, I went back to researching alternatives and discovered that there are completely legitimate people who make custom lockpicking tools for educational purposes only. Very official, very above board. I also remembered that I knew someone who had previously explored the merits of these tools, which is when I decided to reach out to none other than Jonathon Boring. Jonathon was incredibly kind, and as luck would have it, also lives very close to me. That's 2 wins already. I asked if he'd be interested in demonstrating his lock-picking expertise on the channel, and he agreed. So here we are, meeting in person for the very first time ever, about to learn something new. Let's listen in as Jonathon offers some wisdom, or at least shows us how this is actually done.
The goal is get enough leverage on this where it starts the turn. Yes, if I can get it. And then it'll lock that pin in place. Well, it was set. When I pulled it off, the pin went back. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This bottom pin is just all the way set already. So is there a pin here? No.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Let's go!
Yeah. Oh my god!
Let's go!
I can't believe it. And then it comes,
Wow!
and then it comes off. Nice.
Let's go!
Wow!
Awesome.
Wow! All right. Thank you, sir. Wow. Only 30 minutes. But how long did it take to open the back door?
2 seconds. I was like, hi. I walked around, I unlocked it, and it was done.
Nice.
This is probably a higher quality lock, for sure, than the back.
The back lock turns out to be very similar to the locks on my arcade machines, except this one uses 2 long metal rods running up and down from the latch. I'm fairly confident I can replace this with parts I have already lying around. The front lock, however, completely different story. That one is fully commercial grade, very much outside my comfort zone. A quick search on Amazon leads me to a replacement made by a company called Keep, whoever they are. The important thing is that it comes with keys, which means I'll finally be able to open this machine without turning it into an incident. But why open it in the first place? Well, for starters, look at all this stuff. There's easily 300 DVDs inside, possibly more. Jonathon and I scoop up most of the fallen discs off the bottom of the cabinet and into a box so we can access the computer sitting at the very base of the machine, which is not where you want loose DVDs accumulating. Opening one of the discs reveals that a small company using the domain rentmoviesmore.com was operating at least 3 of these machines in the Katy, Texas area. How this particular machine ended up in Navasota, unclear. Naturally, I bought the domain, so if you visit it now, you'll be redirected to a completely reasonable website that will absolutely meet your expectations. As for the computer itself, the machine boots to a screen announcing a kernel panic, and then it immediately gives up. No popcorn is involved. The kernel is the core of the operating system, and if it panics, nothing else is happening. That's just how that works. There's also some interesting hardware inside, including what appears to be a webcam mounted at the very top of the cabinet. My best guess is that it takes a photo when the machine powers on, or possibly lets someone remotely inspect the interior if something jams. Either way, it's watching more than I expected. And while we're inside, we do a little cleaning. I don't think this machine has ever been cleaned, but given how tightly sealed the cabinet is, I'm actually surprised it isn't worse. Everything looks like it's been quietly doing its job for years, but without being acknowledged. The computer itself looks like a budget early 2000s PC, complete with a 250 gig SATA hard drive mounted conveniently on the side. It's housed in its own little enclosure, which somehow manages to be both practical and slightly mysterious at the same time. I unplug the hard drive, I take it inside, see if we can find clues about how to bring the system back to life. My MacBook immediately says it does not recognize the drive at all, which feels correct. So I install EXTFS, which allows you to read extremely unfamiliar file systems, appropriate for an extremely unfamiliar DVD vending machine. Once connected, we're able to browse the files, and it turns out the system is running some flavor of Ubuntu Linux. I copy everything over to my MacBook so it can poke around safely and quickly discover a folder full of grainy, heavily compressed movie previews. They look rough, which makes me very curious about what we're going to see once this machine is fully operational again. It's day 3 of owning a DVDNow vending machine. Yes, that's the actual company name, and honestly, they nailed it. Much better than DVD Then or DVD When I Feel Like It, which feels less confident and more seasonal. Today's goal is replacing the old coin cell batteries inside the machine. These little button-shaped miracles provide about 3 volts DC of power so the machine can remember things, important things, like how it works. I find one mounted on the door, although I'm not entirely sure what all the hardware there actually controls. There's the monitor, the hatch where the DVD comes out, some little robotic arms that move the discs around, and then the larger mechanism that returns everything to its proper slot. It's a lot of moving parts for something that just wants to hand you Shrek 3. Luckily, I have a drawer full of these batteries, so without hesitation, I pop in a new one and boot the machine to see if anything exciting happens. And something exciting does happen. The transport mechanism starts moving downward, gets about halfway, and then suddenly collides with something, and then stops completely. That feels like a problem for later. The system boots exactly as it did before and lands right back on the kernel panic screen. No surprises there. Replacing the battery was still worth doing. It probably wasn't going to fix everything immediately, but now we can officially rule it out as the cause, which feels productive. Since this machine is basically a PC in a cabinet, I know there's probably another battery hiding inside the computer itself. I discover that all 4 corners of the PC case are bolted down, so I grab my nut drivers and start removing them. The first 3 bolts come out effortlessly because that's how these things work. The 4th bolt, however, refuses to cooperate with anything I own. I have to break out the Exolite nut drivers, cycle through several sizes, and eventually I determine that the orange one is the chosen one. With the case open, we take a look inside. There's a large fan, and after some searching, I find the battery tucked into a strange little spot near the front edge. This is the CMOS battery, and its job is to remember the computer's configuration. I'm pretty sure this battery biting the dust is why the machine no longer boots properly. Now we just have to figure out what configuration makes it happy again. We power it up once more and kernel panic. Still, that's fine. I'm not in a rush. And I also have Google, plus a group of very knowledgeable technology experts that are probably watching this video, which means it's only a matter of time before we figure out the exact combination of settings this machine is willing to accept. It's time to get serious and actually interact with the computer using our German keyboard, which has absolutely no labels on it, because I enjoy obstacles. I never took a typing class in high school because I could see the keyboard in my head. That's right, your boy was a freak. But now that confidence has brought me here, guessing which combination of keys will solve the mystery of the panicking kernel. Let's see if we've been booting from the wrong device this entire time. There's exactly 2 options in the boot menu, so we intentionally select the SATA drive that we confidently reinstalled earlier. If this fixes the problem, I will celebrate by attempting a small dance on top of the machine, assuming I can climb up there. It looks sturdy. I trust it more than I trust this software. Okay, fingers crossed. And the result? Kernel panic again. At this point, I'm starting to think the kernel isn't confused. It just doesn't like me. I eventually find my way into an Ubuntu boot menu and notice there's a memtest utility which lets us check whether the computer itself is healthy. After letting it run for a while, everything checks out. The system is fine. One thing I hadn't noticed before, though, is that this machine only has 1 gigabyte of RAM, which tells me the manufacturer made a conscious decision to do the bare minimum. I don't love that. If this thing is going to refuse to boot, it's going to refuse to boot with at least 4 gigs of RAM installed, out of principle. I exit memtest, confirm that the kernel is still panicking, and it is. So now it's time to go into the BIOS. This is where I invite the smart people to the conversation. Please take a look at these settings and tell me if you see anything suspicious that might convince this computer to calm down and load an operating system like it was designed to. Our new lock and upgraded memory are officially on order, so we're going to pause here and give everyone time to reflect on what they've just watched. If you enjoyed this video, please drop us a like. It helps more than you'd think. If you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, hit subscribe. And if you want to be startled by a premiere notification on a completely random day at a random time, hit the bell. Stay tuned. Woot!